Hi class. Okay, we are now coming to a bit of an interjection in the discussion of the partners that are in a business. And that interjection is the impact of globalization and how that affects being an ethical manager. So I think we've got to take a little bit of a look at definitions, and then we'll be able to more accurately answer that question. So globalism is essentially trying to make the world a smaller place by making business international, so that one company can be in 120 different countries, and it's essentially the same deal in each country. And then what it can do, the economic benefit of that, is that it can extract the unique resources to each one of its places, use those resources in the manufacture of its product, whatever that would be, and then distribute the product through the balance of its locations throughout the world. And in that way, it has an international appeal. So for argument's sake, if you are making a cellular phone, you might do metal extraction somewhere in Africa. You may have assembly plants somewhere in China, and you may have distribution centers somewhere in America and Europe. And that's what a global economy is all about. The premise behind that economic structure is that there is a cost advantage, that it's cheaper to produce or to assemble the product in China than it would be to assemble the product in America, that it's easier to mine the materials that are in Africa than it is to mine those same materials in America. And that may have been traditionally true. But as we've seen throughout our various discussions in this course, things evolve and change over time. And one of the interesting things that I think we've got to take a look at that may kind of sidetrack this move towards globalization is the dramatic change in technology. In the past, where large labor forces were necessary for the assembly of products or the actual making of the products, then the cost of labor was a critical component of the product, as much as 30%. So if you could find a low-cost location in which to make it and reduce it from 30% to 10%, it was worth the move. I think what we see now with automation, with new technology, which is really some of it at the tip of being introduced, such as 3D printing, I think we're beginning to see that the cost of labor in the actual production of anything is much closer to the area of 10% rather than 30%. And that has a startling application for the production of materials, or the production, rather, of products. And that is that when we consider the cost of transporting the product from a third world nation where it was perhaps made, the cost of transportation may outweigh the savings in labor. So if it costs more than 10% to get it to the country where it can be sold, then it may certainly make more sense to produce it in the country that it's being sold than to produce it in a third world nation using an inexpensive labor force and then shipping it to a consuming nation. So on the one hand, we have this economic pressure to homogenize society, to make everybody kind of the same, And that was because there were economic advantages attached to that. But now we see that it could be that globalization will not be necessary in order to achieve that goal, and that rather what will happen is instead of globalization, we'll have what I like to call localization, where the production will literally be in the communities and the neighborhoods and the cities where the product is actually consumed. So, for example, if we're just using um, cellular phones as an example, it is possible that cellular phones will be made somewhere around New York City with 3D printing, and then distributed in that vicinity so that people can have what it is that they want. And in fact, it may even become possible um, that people will 3D print all of their own stuff and simply pay a license fee for the software so that they are able to print the cell phone that they want, or the radio that they want, or the TV that they want. So it may become very, very localized, simply because you have almost no transportation costs in order to get it to the marketplace, and so that makes the product far less expensive. Now, what's interesting about that is that as well, on a political basis, we have an entire movement, a nationalistic movement. Saw it most prevalently in America and United States, but it's certainly happening in other countries where people are reflecting and expressing their disappointment with the fact that although they consume the product, they're not able to have the jobs that allow them to make the very product that they're consuming. So you have this one move of technology that is making sense in terms of moving the production back to a local economy. And at the same time, the local economies, the local people are saying, we want those means of production here if we are the consumers of that. And so you have both of those moves kind of occurring at the same time, and it's really quite interesting. So certainly globalization, as it was moving externally, provided a lot of challenges in terms of ethical behavior, because companies that moved into third world markets to either extract or produce product now suddenly had to deal with governments and cultures that were different, and in some cases dramatically different, than the cultures and governments of the home country. And so there will be an entire challenge in how to incorporate that, since the entire world is not basically on the same platform. We'll get into that a little bit later, but it's a relevant issue. Now, as we move to localization, that issue, of course, seems to just sort of melt away, unless, of course, you are the local manufacturer, and then those issues will obviously still be there. Just as an example of how this is a problem, is there was an oil company called Unicol, and they made a deal with a country to build a pipeline and extract oil from the country. So they had to get the oil from where it was found to the seaport where it could be shipped. In order to build the pipeline, they had to go through all kinds of jungle and many local communities. And so what happened was the company made a deal with the local government to provide security for the pipeline, so that villagers and people that weren't maybe in favor of this pipeline would be kept away. But it also turned out that this militia or military also conscripted the people to help build the pipeline. So not only did they act as the guards for the pipeline, but they acted as the HR department, getting people together to do it. And the abuses were enormous. And they were detailed in actuality in a court case that was brought against Unocal, specifically, of course, in America, not in the country where this was done, because the government of that country could care less. To make a long story short, even the judge in this case, which is so unusual, began to question the behavior, the ethical behavior of the company. And it serves to highlight that if you are working in a third world culture, that even though you can get away with what you're doing, you may be held accountable back in your home country for what you're doing. And that's exactly what happened in the Unocal case. Essentially, the company was fined. It had to ultimately sell out. I'm thinking that it was Texaco who bought them, but I could be wrong. Chevron bought out the company, so they essentially, that was the end of them, and that was because they had all kinds of human rights abuses that were attributable to this militia that they hired in order to help them build and protect the oil line. So you can see that this globalization movement brings with it, just one example, certain ethical challenges that, again, if you're not on top of it, will come back to haunt you, especially in this particular day and age of social media and unbelievable transparency. So I think that this whole question about the globalization move is really going to be turned on its head in the next 10 or 15 years as the technology grows at a dramatic rate and begins to push different companies to begin to produce locally, because it's just not advantageous to do it on an international level, where the cost of freight to bring the product from the manufacturing country to the selling country is just going to be so enormous. Just on a final note, Adidas closed their factory in China and opened a factory in America, United States, and another factory in Germany, one to supply the European market, the other one to supply the American market. And all of the sneakers or shoes, the running shoes, sorry, that they make are entirely 3D printed. So it's simply a question of the capital cost of building the factory, and then the factory and the production essentially runs on its own, and all you need is a packing and shipping facility, which they have, and they closed their factories in China. And China was, for many, many years, known for its inexpensive labor. And here they are losing out because, of course, once they make the shoes in China, they have to get them from China to America or to Europe. So I think that trend is going to be continuing. And so that will generate also something that business likes, which is a certain stability, because there is a connection between consumption and production. There is no additional issues about importing, taxes, all kinds of political controversies that may or may not exist. Everything is handled where it is. So it is true that you might have Nike making shoes in America in a factory that 3D prints it for America, and then have another factory in China that 3D prints the same shoes or different shoes or whatever for the Chinese market. And eventually, I would suggest that the 3D printing will become so cost efficient that what will happen is companies like Nike will essentially sell you the software to 3D print the shoe at home. So you can have it literally custom fitted to your foot, because you'll scan your foot and then you input the software for the style of sneaker or shoe that you want, and then it's 3D printed right in front of your eyes, all put together and all good and ready to go. So that's where I think it's going to go. I mean, I'm being a little bit futuristic on that, but in terms of globalization and in terms of understanding the impact on ethics, I think those are the facts.